Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Whitman.
This afternoon we'll have two capstone presentations. Our first is from Ms. Abigail Whitman, and her thesis statement is, as Dr. Hans Seeley, the father of stress, properly understood stress, when anxiety, also known as distress, is properly understood, it is easily categorized as unhealthy, as opposed to eustress, which promotes health. Please join me in welcoming Abigail.
How do you feel? Are you stressed out? Was that distressing? What do these words even mean? Today, I want you to truly ponder the question, is stress healthy? To say no would mean stress is not healthy. But when an important sports game or performance comes up, you begin to feel motivated and inspired to train harder, to get better, and to be in the right mindset. In this sense, stress is healthy and beneficial. Therefore, not all stress is unhealthy. But, however, if you were to say that stress is healthy, there'd be zero explanation for anxiety disorders. Therefore, I argue that stress can be healthy or unhealthy. But what decides this? Dr. Hans was the first scientist to identify stress as underpinning the non-specific reaction in signs and symptoms of illness. His research proved that stress could be bad or good. Dr. Hans properly understood stress in all its aspects and variations. Though the term stress is primarily used negatively, Dr. Hans understood a little bit of stress keeps life exciting. He believed that there was a certain amount of stress healthy for an individual to experience. But what does this balance of stress look like? This scale to measure it would be on a scale of two different types of stress, de-stress and eustress. As Dr. Hans properly understood stress, when anxiety, also known as de-stress, is properly understood, it is easily categorized as unhealthy, as opposed to eustress, which promotes health. For the truth about stress to be fully understood, it is important to use health, measured by goodness and happiness, as the lens to which we observe it. Unlike just sounding a bullhorn, let's eustress our way through this by focusing on the following questions. What is health and why is it important and good? Is eustress healthy? Is de-stress healthy? What is good? What is happiness? Why is goodness and happiness important? Both eustress and de-stress are reactions to a stressor. One of these stress reactions is positive, while the other is negative and bad. The Greek prefix eu sounds like you. It means good. Therefore, eustress can be considered good stress. Eustress is the positive form of stress, having a beneficial effect on health, motivation, performance, and emotional well-being. De-stress is the negative kind of stress that most people associate with feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and to experience physical and psychological symptoms such as headaches, tension, insomnia, inattentiveness, or irritability linked to a number of physical and mental illnesses, as well as mental impairment. Stress, as Dr. Hans defines it, is the non-specific response to the body to any demand on it. These are not just fancy definitions. These words and their meanings correspond with the truth of our body, mind, and soul. If eustress, the positive stress reaction, is chosen as the reaction to one of these stressors, signs presented could be increased energy, focus, productivity, and excitement, as well as improved motivation and performance. If de-stress, the negative stress reaction, is chosen, then some signs could be lack of sleep and focus, fatigue, restlessness, headaches, mood changes, shortness of breath, digestion issues, chest pains. I can go on. But since eustress and de-stress have severely different reactions, It is proper and correct to categorize them differently. But is it also correct to identify anxiety and distress as one? By the definitions, they seem to be one and the same. While distress is defined as the negative kind of stress, which people feel when they're overwhelmed or anxious, anxiety can be defined as the feeling of dread and fear or apprehension with often no clear justification for it. Both of these conditions cause difficulty on a day-to-day basis. Anxiety and distress can cause further health conditions, mental and physical. Being that the definitions, the mental conditions, and the symptoms are all the same, it's proper to identify them as the same thing. In order to demonstrate health, when proving certain stress is healthy, it is important to first understand what health is in all its dimensions and why it's important. Health, according to the World Health Organization, is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Stress primarily focuses on the mental and physical health. Mental health is not only the absence of mental illnesses, but it focuses on our emotional, our psychological, and our social well-being. Physical health is the condition of your body, taking into consideration everything from between the absence of disease to the physical fitness level. Though these healths differ, they can and do still affect one another. Unlike other physical illnesses, mental illness starts in the brain. The brain is an organ, but it's the least understood organ in the body. It still goes under changes, injuries, developments, just like any other organ. Therefore, a healthy mind is an inherent part of a healthy body. It is well known that being healthy should be a part of your overall lifestyle. Why? Not only because taking care of your health is important for self-esteem, but mainly because living a healthy lifestyle can help prevent chronic diseases and long-term illnesses. I argue that health's importance lies deeper concepts than just one of goodness and happiness. Happiness is the end goal of every human being, also known as their telos. Happiness is the fulfillment of all desire, to know God, to love God, and to enjoy God, as well as to serve Him. This desire is not referring to desires of pleasure. For in a worldly sense, happiness is getting what you want when you want it. But in a morally correct sense, happiness is getting what you need when you need it and how you need it. In other words, true happiness is getting what you want when what you want is good. St. Aquinas states in Part 1, Question 5, Article 1 of his Summa Theologica, that goodness signifies perfection, which is desirable, and consequently, the ultimate perfection. According to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, something is perfect when nothing is lacking in its nature or purpose. Happiness and goodness are the criterion by which we should be measuring health. Because for someone to be healthy, they must be happy. Because if one is not happy, they may fall victim to depression-induced illnesses, which are quite obviously not healthy. The same goes for goodness. Health is good. Therefore, the goodness of a person is determined by their health. Now that health and its importance are understood, one of the most important questions of this subject is whether or not stress is inherently healthy. It has already been stated that if eustress is chosen as a reaction to the stressor, the signs presented could be very positive and beneficial. As well as eustress promotes emotional, psychological, and physical health. Emotionally, eustress can result in positive feelings of contentment, inspiration, and motivation. Psychologically, eustress helps us build our self-efficiency, our autonomy, and our resilience. Physically, eustress can help build our body. In summary, eustress is healthy. By observing the previously stated effects of distress, it is apparent that it causes poor physical health along with mental impairment. This mental impairment is obviously not good and does not promote happiness or goodness. But if you need more evidence that distress isn't healthy, then I could say to you that this mental impairment I speak of leads to certain anxiety disorders, which cause individuals to fall sick and die. From depression-induced illnesses, of course, which is from the health line. Therefore, if it is appropriate and correct to identify eustress as healthy and distress as unhealthy, meaning stress can be healthy or unhealthy. But what describes this healthiness? While anxiety is studied scientifically, it can only be appropriately approached objectively and subjectively. Anxiety is objective in the sense that when a stressor is presented, a stimuli in the brain will react. It is subjective because once this stimuli reacts, a person's given a choice. The choice to choose whether they'll use this stress beneficially or destructively. In other words, the individual is given a choice between eustress and de-stress, which determines the person's health. It is harder to choose to be motivated by stress than to simply despair. But we do always have a choice when confronted with a stressor. With all the knowledge just presented to you, and to myself, the question of whether choosing eustress over de-stress is a moral obligation becomes very important. By saying it's a moral obligation, that's not to say that you'll never experience de-stress again in your life. Everyone has a breaking point. But if the writings of St. Thomas are observed carefully, in his Summa Theologica, to paraphrase, he says, "To live fearfully is a sin, but to have fears and still act is human. Therefore, it is a moral obligation to choose eustress over de-stress to the best of our ability, with the understanding that sometimes experiencing de-stress is unavoidable. Is how we deal with stress a big deal? Well, not to de-stress you, but it is. The way we deal with stress determines our health, our goodness, and our happiness. With the exception of some physical disorders, how one deals with stress is largely in their own control. Being that anxiety mostly lies within our own hands causes us to have to take action and choose. I can speak from personal experience that choosing to feel motivated is much harder than despairing. It'd be so much easier for me if every time I was inconvenienced or burdened to simply cry and whine or cuddle up in my bed with food and a good movie. But that doesn't help anything. Not my health, not my happiness. So what person will you choose to be today? The person who chooses their stressor to motivate them to take initiative in advance, or the person who procrastinates and allows their self to despair? As Dr. Hans once said, it's not stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it. And a little bit of stress never killed anybody, and it keeps life exciting. When we can see what Dr. Hans speaks of in the sacred scripture, specifically in the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 29. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." Thank you.
Do you have any faculty questions?
Deacon Conk.
Thank you, Abigail. I was wondering if in your research and reflection on this topic, you were able to consider how saints have engaged in this, so in particular in the interior life of some saints that may have struggled with anxiety, like a Saint Teresa of Lisieux, others. Do you find in their example a witness to back up your thesis?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for your question. So I really do think that through discerning is probably one of the most stressful things one will do in their life. Discerning whether to stay chaste, discerning your vocation in general is stressful. And a lot of them had very stressful lives, doing stressful things. Some may even say bad things. And they had to discern whether or not what they did next was going to be de-stress or eustress. And I do really think every time they chose eustress, they did more so the right thing and avoided sin. So I would say the saints are a perfect example of how we can see de-stress and eustress used.
Thank you.
Mr. Gray?
Thanks for your presentation, Abigail. I have a quick clarification in that question. So it sounded like you said when a stimulus is offered, or a human being receives a stimulus, we choose how to, something happens in our brain, and then we're presented with a choice to respond. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so given that, I was wondering if you had any ideas about how we as students and teachers, as parents and children could cultivate a mindset and an attitude that makes it easier to respond to stressors in a healthy way. So, I guess to simplify the question, what can we do to cultivate a mindset or attitude that helps us respond well?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I think one of the main things is practice. So every time you're presented with even the smallest of stressors, don't take a negative mindset of, oh, this is awful. Say, you know what, I get to grow today, personally. I get to grow, yeah. But it's definitely, you have to practice it with every tiny thing, and then maybe once the bigger stressors are presented, it's easier to choose eustress. I will say that some better things to do for at least a Catholic is to pray for the blessings of temperance, definitely, to help. But yeah, it's definitely practice is the biggest thing you're gonna need to do.
So quick follow-up.
Mhm.
So when I'm struggling in math class and I mess up a math problem, you're saying I should practice responding to that by celebrating the potential to grow?
Yes. Yes. So say I'm doing, I won't use math because I like math. Say I'm writing an essay. I don't like essays. I don't think I'm good at them. So I should, again, not saying that you're never going to despair again or experience de-stress again, but I should take that as I'm going to learn so much through this experience. I'm going to become one of the best writers in my class. Or, sorry guys. One of the best writers I could be for myself. I'm going to grow so much. And that's not to say if I mess up, oh, I'm giving up. I did the best I can. No. I did as well as I could do. Now I'm going to do better than that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
No problem. Mr. Paley, pleasure to meet you, Ms. Whitman. It's been kind of clear to me as a teacher of many years that de-stress, or the unhealthy experience of anxiety, is on the rise. I don't think it was ever mentioned when I was in high school a few short years ago. So that being said, in your research, why is de-stress on the rise in such an unhealthy fashion nowadays?
Well, the simple answer would be it's easier. It's simply easier to, I could have thrown away my capstone and said I give up. I'm going to go to a different school. That's not benefiting anything. I'm not going to get better at another school just because I can't do this. So I would say it's really because it's accessible and it's almost taught that you want to do whatever is easiest. You want to do whatever is going to get you in and out. You want to graduate. That's the main goal. You want to get an A. No. You want to do good. You want to be happy. That's what you want to achieve. And that's what choosing eustress is going to get you closer to. De-stress won't. It's very prevalent, especially in our youth today, because it's almost force-fed a little bit. But it's mostly because it's easier.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Fettig?
Thanks, Abigail. Father Jacques Philippe, in his book Searching for and Maintaining Interior Peace, describes that it's kind of a Christian ideal to go about your day without ever allowing events to really ruffle the waters of your soul, which he says should be kind of clear and peaceful so that you can see down into the depths, because they're always aware that God is in ultimate control. Does that contradict your approach towards eustress? In other words, should we try to mitigate the experience of stress at all, or should we kind of harness it? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So, just so I have your question correct, are you asking if, as like a person should avoid stressors in general?
Not stressors, but should a person ever experience or distress?
Oh, 100%.
Should it?
Yes, they
Okay.
should, because through stress we grow and we benefit and we get closer to our telos, happiness, goodness, health. Everyone's gonna experience de-stress, whether you like it or not, whether or not it's negative, because sometimes everyone's gonna cry, someone's gonna get despaired. But eustress is definitely something someone needs to experience because they felt what de-stress has been like and how it hasn't helped. So eustress would definitely be what one needs to experience.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Mr. Anson?
Thanks, Abigail. I have a sports analogy for you. I've heard it reported that a lot of coaches or coaching programs are criticizing, I guess, sports systems where players are basically encouraged to win games as opposed to coaches should be, let's say, developing players.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's an analogy here, like let's say to a student in a classroom studying to make an A versus studying for student development.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you think that the role of distress and eustress you spoke of might shed some light on that same issue.
So when it comes to my personal experience within a team setting, I'm not the best player on the team. I'm not. So I could say, I'm not the best, I'm gonna quit. Instead, I'm gonna choose eustress and say, I'm gonna train harder than the best player, and I'm gonna become better. I'm gonna show up to every practice, I'm not gonna skip. I'm gonna be at every game, I'm gonna cheer everybody on even though I'm not on the field. That's the ways to grow, just as you would in a classroom setting when you get a C and you say, you know what, I want to be better. I'm going to study harder than the smartest person. I'm going to be in every class. I'm going to be attentive. I'm going to be awake. Or maybe I'm just but yeah, I would say they're almost the exact same.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any senior questions?
Caroline?
Thank you for your presentation. Okay, so whenever you were talking about de-stress, you said that one example was to despair and to cry about it. But a lot of people say that crying is a very healthy expression of your emotions as long as you cry and then you can move on. And so what would you say to someone who says that and is crying about your emotions and just the way that you process it? Is that de-stress in itself?
So I would not say crying in general is de-stress. If my grandmother died and I cried, how dare you? No, I'm crying because I'm gonna miss my grandma. I'm not crying because I'm giving up. So I would say crying is beneficial in some ways. This is why I said I forgot who the question was, but sometimes you need to experience de-stress for you to understand why you need to experience eustress more. What was the other part of your question? Sorry.
You answered it.
Oh, okay, great. Marissa?
Thank you for your presentation. So I was wondering, in your research or your own personal experience with social media, how has that had a huge role in, I know you, with Mr. Paoletti's question, you said that right now it's so easy for us to just choose de-stress.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could tie in how social media has played a huge role in us choosing de-stress.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So I would say that goes along with a lot of Kinsey Wexler's capstone. You can de-stress and say, you know what, that supermodel's so beautiful, I'm disgustingly ugly, so I'm just not gonna have any hygiene or health or anything. No. I think when you see that, you should say she's beautiful and so am I. That's what choosing eustress would be. De-stressing would be, you know what, I'm never gonna look like that. You're right. You're gonna look like you, which is just as good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Abigail.